Welcome to Your Business, Your Life with Matt Francesco, your personal financial technician. Whether you've had years of success in your business or are just starting out, HighLift Financial can help you create a vision for your business, life, and family, and align these for generational wealth. So as they say, what happens in your life affects your business. And now, on to the show. Hello, and welcome to Your Business, Your Life with me, your host, Matt Francesco. And I've got a really interesting topic because there's been a lot of inquiries in my space about employee ownership, and especially with ESOPs. I'm actually fortunate to have met this man about 3 years ago at the Business Enterprise Institute conference. He is the nation's premier ESOP consultant. His name's Kelly Finnell. He spent more than 40 years helping business owners design and execute ESOP. So we've got the man in this space. He's presented at more than 300 conferences and meetings throughout the U.S. and abroad. And he's also written the book called The ESOP Coach, Using ESOPs in Ownership Succession Planning. He wrote that in 2010. And to this day, it remains kind of the comprehensive guide to ESOPs today. And I mean, I was looking at his website and he had all these different distinctions. And I'm like, I'll use the whole podcast doing that. So I'd rather talk to Kelly about this. So anyway, he's a graduate of a magna cum laude, which I would have no idea what that was because I was not a good student anyway, but from the University of Memphis. And he's also an accredited investment fiduciary, which means that he's always looking out for the client's best interest, which is a really important thing. I hold myself as a fiduciary also. And he's actually been awarded professional designation from the Center of Fiduciary Studies with the University of Pittsburgh. So, know this, if you utilize Kelly to help you to implement or do a feasibility study on an ESOP, he's the guy and he's always going to look out for your best interest. So Kelly, welcome to Your Business, Your Life.
Matt, great to be with you.
I'm really looking forward to this one. And did I miss anything or I know I missed a lot of stuff, but is there anything I left out I got wrong? So
no, that was very generous. Thank you.
That's no problem. So, well, let's get right into it because I know, and at least in my world, it seems like more and more people are asking about ESOPs. And I know we were just talking beforehand and you said your numbers have pretty much doubled since then. So it's getting more interest in recent years. And so why do you think that is?
I think that there are a couple of key factors. The first is the demographic wave that's happened as a result of the baby boom generation. So that's that group of people that were born between 1954 and 1964. And that group, as they age, are looking to cash in on their life's work.
Right.
And so there is a huge gray tsunami or silver tsunami that's sweeping the U.S. business world. And so business owners are asking themselves about their exit strategies. And there are several ways to exit a business, as you know very well. You can sell to private equity, you can sell to a strategic buyer, you can die with your boots on, or you can do an ESOP, where you sell your business to your employees through the tax advantages that are only available with an employee stock ownership plan. So I think that the first factor is demographics, the aging of the baby boomers and people really focusing on the exit strategies that are available. Right. I think the second thing that's happened is people have become much more aware of ESOPs and their tax benefits. And at the same time, I think people have become aware of the disadvantages of selling to private equity. I talk to business owners every day who say, I had a friend, they sold to private equity and it didn't go well. And so now I'm looking for an alternative to selling to private equity, and an ESOP offers a great alternative. And I think the third thing is that there were some misnomers, some misunderstandings about ESOPs that I think some of the literature has now cleared up, and we can talk about some of those things today to make sure that your listeners don't harbor any of those misconceptions. And so I think those three factors have really contributed to a big boom in the usage of ESOPs.
I think that's so important because it was actually interesting. My first experience with an ESOP was a client I had many, many, many years ago, and they had an ESOP in place. It was interesting. Actually, it was the CFO was kind of educating me on the basic and some of the mechanisms that it went into. But it was funny because probably about I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago, the actual owner did fully exit. He sold the ESOP, and it benefited not only him, but it also benefited the employees there too.
Absolutely. So ESOPs are a great strategy for those owners who want to do well by others,
Mhm.
namely their employees, while doing well for themselves and for their family.
Yeah, I know. I think that's true. So, you talked a little bit about this lack of understanding about ESOPs. Could you give the listeners? I mean, we know they're complex, but just kind of the basics of how the ESOP works and some of the misconceptions that you talked about. Address some of those so that we can make sure that we've got very clear air on all of this.
Okay. So, first, what is an ESOP? It's two things in one. For a business owner, it is a liquidity and ownership succession strategy. So, as I mentioned earlier, it is an alternative to a sale to a third party. It is a way for a business owner to sell the stock in their company to their employees with a heavy tax subsidy provided by Uncle Sam.
Right.
The second thing is for the employees, an ESOP is a retirement plan. So it's a first cousin to a 401k plan. So many of your listeners are familiar with 401k plans.
Mhm.
In ESOPs, about 80% of the rules that apply to 401k plans are the same rules that apply to ESOPs. But there are three key differences that allow an ESOP to act not just as a retirement plan, but also as this liquidity vehicle for the owner. So the first difference is that an ESOP can borrow money.
Mhm.
Every other type of retirement plan is prohibited from borrowing money. An ESOP can do that. The second thing is that an ESOP can engage in certain transactions with parties in interest, and I'll explain what that means. And then the third thing is that an ESOP is required to invest primarily in the stock of the sponsoring employer. So if you take those four things, that an ESOP is a form of retirement plan that can borrow money.
Mhm.
So an ESOP borrows money from a bank and from the selling shareholder. Those are the two sources of capital that typically fund an ESOP transaction. So if you had a $10 million business, you might expect the ESOP to be able to borrow between $3 and $4 million.
Okay.
And then the rest of the purchase price would be funded with seller notes.
Mm.
Then I said that an ESOP can engage in certain transactions with parties in interest. So the ESOP takes those two sources of capital, the
Mhm.
bank debt and the seller note, and uses that to purchase stock from our owner.
Right.
And then I said that an ESOP is required to invest primarily in the stock of the company. And so over a period of time, and that usually is a minimum of 20 years, the shares that the ESOP has purchased get divided up among the employees' retirement accounts.
Okay.
So instead of the employees having mutual funds in their retirement account like they would with a 401k plan, with an ESOP, they have the stock of their company in their account, which gives them a very powerful performance incentive.
Okay.
Their future wealth is going to be dependent upon the growth of their company, which they
Right.
can influence by working harder and smarter.
Right. So can an employer do a 401k and an ESOP in conjunction with each other?
Yes, most of our clients, when we first start working with them, already have a 401k plan in place. They usually offer a match, and that typically is a safe harbor
Right.
match.
Right.
And so every one of our clients, when we do the ESOP, they keep their 401k plan in place. That always happens. About 50% of the time, they redirect the company match from the 401k so that that money goes into the ESOP.
Oh, really?
Other 50% of the time, the company does both. It continues the 401k match and makes a big contribution to the employee's ESOP account.
Interesting.
You've got flexibility, and the business owner's in control of that decision.
Gotcha. So when shares are being distributed to employees, just to use a nice round number, let's say there's 100 employees. Okay. Do those shares get distributed pro rata, or is there discrimination that can be used based off the amount of time they've been employed with the employer?
Yeah, the shares are typically divided on what's called a salary ratio basis.
Okay.
And so the easiest way to explain that is an example. If you have an employee who makes $300,000 a year and an employee who makes $50,000 a year, then that $300,000 employee is going to get 6 times as many shares in their account as compared to the $50,000 a year employee.
Right.
So you are inherently providing a greater benefit to the people who are making more money, who typically are the people who are the most valuable to the company, and they're going to have the greatest influence driving value into the future.
Okay. All right.
Now,
So
it
how,
is possible to include longevity in the formula as well.
Mhm.
That requires some special testing, but that is a possibility.
Okay. Are ESOPs under ERISA?
Yes, an ESOP is a form of qualified retirement plan. So, like a 401k plan, profit sharing plan, or defined benefit plan.
Okay. Okay, great. This is an interesting question. I've gotten this. How are these shares valued? Because, a lot of these are private companies. Before the ESOP, the owner owns 100% of the stock. So, how is evaluation done on these shares?
Well, it's really depends on what time we're talking about. So, pre-transaction, the purchase price for the shares is going to be based on a negotiation
Okay.
between the seller, which is the owner of the company, and the trustee of the ESOP, which is the purchaser of the shares. So the trustee is going to hire a valuation advisor.
Okay.
And that valuation advisor is going to say to the trustee, you cannot pay more than X number of dollars for this stock. And if you pay more than that, you violated your fiduciary responsibility. So
Okay.
no trustee would do that. And so there's not a valuation on the front end that tells the trustee you're going to pay X. There's a valuation that says you're not going to pay more than Y. And so then we represent the owner, the selling shareholder, and we negotiate a purchase price with the trustee.
Oh,
Then in subsequent years, there is a more traditional valuation that's done because we got to be able to tell employees what the value of the stock in their account is. So that same firm that represented the trustee on the front end
mhm.
continues to represent the trustee, but now they do a more traditional valuation.
Gotcha. Okay. So, who would end up being the trustee on the ESOP trust?
It would be somebody who specializes in that work. It could
Hmm.
be an individual or an entity. When I first started in the business, there were big banks that served as ESOP trustees. None of them do that anymore. This is more of a cottage industry now,
Right.
where it's small specialty corporate trustees or individuals that serve that role. So let me give you an example of who you might see because I think that'll help better answer your question.
Okay.
We work with a trustee who, before he became an ESOP trustee, was the CFO of an ESOP company.
Mm.
Then he became the CEO of that ESOP company.
Okay.
By education, he's a CPA, was with one of the big four accounting firms. And then he decided he wanted to be an ESOP trustee.
Okay.
And so this is somebody who has spent a career in the ESOP world, has all of the financial acumen, and now might do 30 or 40 ESOP transactions a year serving as trustee. And that's his only business. And he's got a team probably of 15 people now that help him with all of that work.
Okay. Interesting. So this is a question kind of popped into my head. So we're talking about the initial transfer. The owner is selling shares to the trust, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now with the bank loan, is he getting liquidity from that?
Yes. And so that bank loan is going to go from the bank to the company. Then the company is going to relend that money to the ESOP, and that's going to be cash at close. So going back to our example of a $10 million company, the owner would receive $4 million of cash at close and a $6 million promissory note.
Okay.
And that promissory note is going to be subordinated to the bank loan. And that means a couple of things. First, it means that the seller is going to receive interest only on the seller note until the bank loan is completely repaid.
Mhm.
And it means that the owner, who now is holding a seller note, is going to have a subordinated debt type of return on that seller note.
Okay.
And so bank loans now are at a rate of about 7%
Right.
to fund ESOP transactions.
Okay.
The total return on a seller note is more like 12%
Ooh, okay.
because that debt is subordinated. So sometimes initially, when I tell a business owner that there's going to be seller debt, their initial reaction is negative.
That's
Then they say, is there a way I could get more cash at close? And I
mhm,
say, sure, we could go to the commercial subordinated debt market, talk to mezzanine lenders,
mhm.
and get you some additional cash at close. And they say, what are the terms of that going to look like? And when I tell them, they say, man, I wish I were in that business.
Right.
And I say, okay, I got an opportunity for you to be in that business. You can be the mezz lender in your own transaction and
Interesting.
get that type of very generous return.
That's something. Wow, that's great. So,
So that's the best investment
yeah.
a seller can have. They're going to
Oh,
invest the cash they got at close very conservatively. So
right.
maybe they're going to earn 4 to 6% on that while they're earning 12% on the seller note.
That's amazing. I mean, that definitely makes it worthwhile. Now, do they maintain control of the company through this process?
Let's talk about corporate governance.
Okay.
And so if we have a non ESOP company,
Okay.
corporate governance works in this way. The shareholders elect the board of directors, and the board of directors hires, fires, and monitors the company officers.
Okay.
So that's in a non ESOP company.
Right.
In an ESOP company, corporate governance works the exact same way with one difference. So the shareholders are going to elect the board, and the board's going to hire, fire, and monitor the officers.
Mhm.
The only difference is that the shareholder is now the ESOP trustee.
Okay. Okay.
And so the way all of this works is a little bit like you would elect a board in a public company.
Hmm.
And so the existing board, the board that was in existence prior to the sale to the ESOP,
Right.
is going to nominate for the next year. So this would be the first year as an ESOP company. They're going to nominate a slate of directors, just like the existing board does in a public company for next year's board.
Right.
And the trustee is going to research and interview those nominated directors. And unless there's a conflict of interest or some type of ethical concern that the trustee has, the trustee is going to invariably approve that slate that had been nominated by the board.
Okay.
And so, what we would typically see is that the selling shareholder would be chairman of the board after the transaction.
Okay.
The CFO would be on the board, one of the other key employees would be on the board, and then there would be two independent directors that had been nominated by the prior board.
Gotcha. So should they be a C corp to do an ESOP?
It depends. You have to be a corporation. Well,
Right.
about half the companies that we deal with when we start working with them are an LLC.
Okay.
And it's a very simple pre transaction matter to have that company incorporated. And when that happens, they almost always are incorporated and then make an S election because they've been taxed as a flow through entity before.
Right.
But if we have a C Corp, then the owner probably will sell as a C Corp and then probably elect S after the sale.
Gotcha.
So let's talk about for just a minute why about 95% of the 100% ESOP owned companies are S Corps.
Okay.
So that's the reality of today.
Right.
I've been doing this for 40 years, and that wasn't always the case. But
Okay.
today, this is what we see. And the reason is back in the late 90s, Congress passed a provision that said S Corps could sponsor an ESOP.
Mm.
Prior to that, an ESOP was a prohibited shareholder in an S corporation. So Congress had to change the law.
Okay.
So they did that. And as a result, a 100% ESOP owned S corporation can now operate on a tax free basis.
Oh,
No tax at the company level because it's an S corp. They
right.
flow through all of their earnings to their shareholder. As I
Mm,
mentioned, their shareholder is going to be the ESOP trustee.
correct.
What do we know about ESOP trustees? They're tax exempt entities.
Okay.
People don't realize at the end of the year, when they get all of their tax reporting on all of their investments,
Hmm.
that they don't get tax reporting on their 401k account. They know that,
Right.
but they typically don't know why.
Uh-huh.
And the reason why is that they don't own those assets.
Hmm.
It feels like they own the assets, but those assets technically are owned by the ESOP trustee for the benefit of the employee. That trustee under section 401 of the Internal Revenue Code is a tax exempt entity. So in a 100% ESOP owned S Corp, no tax at the company level, you flow the earnings through to your sole shareholder, which is a tax exempt entity. And so I have a for profit business that operates like a church or a synagogue on a
Oh,
tax free basis.
wow. That's powerful.
That's
That's really
very
powerful.
powerful.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to a business owner the other day, and they were asking, how are we going to afford the cash flow to pay for the ESOP debt?
Mhm.
And I said, well, the company has earnings and you're going to have this big tax benefit. And they said, explain the tax benefit. And I said, well, what did you pay last year in tax distributions to your shareholders? They
Right.
said, well, we paid about $1 million. I said, what would happen if you no longer had to do that because there's no tax
Right.
on the company's income? You would have an additional $1 million to service this ESOP debt. They said, got it. It
Yeah.
all makes sense. Uncle Sam is picking up 40 to 50% of the cost of this.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
What
it's
what do they
very
s
powerful.
Yeah, I had a old mentor of mine that told me to said, "To avoid taxes is legal, to evade is illegal."
That's
And this
right.
sounds like a great way to avoid taxes, so
Yes,
because it's all
exactly
in the
right.
IRS code, yeah,
Yep.
so if an owner is, listening to this, he says, "Wow, this sounds really intriguing. What type of business would be a good candidate for an ESOP?" And then let's say they are, what are the initial steps that owner should take if they want to consider the ESOP?
Yeah. If I talk to a business owner during the first meeting and they tell me that the key to the company's success are their employees and the culture that they've built, then I know that company is a great candidate for an ESOP.
Right.
And so, because they know that if they sell to a third party, that third party is going to tell them nothing's going to change,
Right.
but everything changes.
Yep.
They
Yep.
know that. Their intuition tells them that, and they know people who have sold to private equity and who have experienced that.
Right.
And so they have firsthand knowledge that everything's going to change. And if they want to protect their employees, and sometimes people don't think about this, but also protect their customers,
Right.
right? Your employees are working for you because of your culture, but your customers are doing business with you because of that culture too.
Right.
And if you change that culture, you're hurting your employees and your customers and the long term success model for your business.
Right.
And so, culture is the key to their success. Businesses where the owner sees the company as a key part of their legacy.
Mhm.
I've had business owners tell me there has been a company in this town with my family's name on it for 50 years, and I want to make sure that doesn't change. And they
Mm.
know, again, if they sell to a third party, that's going to change. And so there are a lot of business owners who think of their business as in a similar way as one of their children,
Yes.
and they want to protect that legacy that
Right.
this business represents. There are some companies out there for whom there's not a natural buyer.
Mhm.
There are businesses out there that don't have people making serious offers to purchase their company. And an ESOP gives a business owner a way to create a purchaser where one might not otherwise exist.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because all you have to do is hire a lawyer, draw up a plan and trust, hire a trustee, and now you have a purchaser.
Great.
So many of our clients are professional services.
Mhm.
We've got a lot of engineering. We've got a lot of advertising and PR firms, architectural firms, also construction companies. Of the 12 transactions that we did last year, 5 of them were for construction companies.
Really?
They've become huge adopters of ESOPs.
Mhm.
And one of the key reasons for that is that private equity doesn't want to buy them, getting back to that point of a company where there's not a purchaser. And the reason private equity might not want to buy them is because of the bonding
Gotcha.
requirements.
Right. Okay.
And so the construction industry has become a huge user of ESOPs. So that's kind of the profile of companies. Another key factor is a company has to be of a minimum size.
Okay.
ESOPs are not for micro companies, they're for
Right.
mid-sized companies. So a company needs to have at least 1 million of adjusted EBITDA
Okay.
and at least 30 employees to be
Okay.
a good candidate.
Right.
Over the last 4 years, our smallest client had 1.2 million of adjusted EBITDA, and the largest had 56 million of EBITDA, and the median was 4 million of EBITDA and 95 employees. And that's
Right.
really what the ESOP market, not just for us, but nationwide, that's pretty much what the ESOP market looks like. So mid-size, successful companies that have a low level of debt.
Right.
So once you have a company that's a candidate, the first step, we have a call, typically with the advisor who's brought them to us, and we answer their questions. We help them assess whether or not they might be a good candidate. And then if they decide that if they want to know more, we'll do a feasibility analysis for them. And in that analysis, we'll answer the 4 key questions that they have. First, if I sell to an ESOP, what would I expect the trustee to pay for my company? So
Right.
we're going to give them an ESOP specific estimate of value.
Okay.
The next question is, how's the transaction going to be financed? And so we've told them that it's going to be bank debt and seller debt, but they want to know more specifically how much cash at close they're going to get. So we're going to do an analysis of how much they can borrow. And then we're going to show them how the seller notes work and what the terms and what the return on those seller notes could be over a period of years. And then we're going to model out all of the debt because the company CFO is going to want to know where the cash is going to come from to pay for this and how long it's going to take to pay off the debt, what the debt service coverage ratio is going to look like, those types of things. So we're going to do all of that analysis for them. Then they're going to want to know about corporate governance, the question that you asked a little while ago. And then the final thing is most of our clients tell us all of our employees are important. We want to do the ESOP to benefit everybody.
Mhm.
But we've got certain employees that are absolutely essential to the success of our business, and we want to do something extra for them.
Oh.
And so I've talked about how the salary ratio formula favors those highly paid people. But the other thing is we always do a stock appreciation rights plan
Oh. Hmm.
when we do an ESOP.
Okay.
And so only the company's 2 or 3 or 4 most key people are going to participate in that.
Exactly. So that's, yeah. So really it's kind of like almost like a two-step process, doing the feasibility, see if it's going to be something that works for the company, and then implementation down the road.
Exactly right.
Correct. Okay.
And so the feasibility process might take 6 to 8 weeks, and implementation usually takes 4 to 5 months.
Okay. Okay. So it can be pretty quick. My niche is with the collision industry. Again, I've got a lot of smaller shops that probably would not, but I've also got a number of multi-shop owners, and those seem to be a good fit. As a matter of fact, that's where we're starting to see a little bit of traction in the collision industry, even though that private equity is interested in these type of businesses because of the insurance reimbursement and the cash flow. A lot of these guys, culture and legacy is a big thing for
Yep.
them, you know. And
Yep.
so that's where I'm starting to get a number of inquiries on this. And I think, like I said, more and more of these multi-shop owners that are kind of falling into that gap. So anything that you want to close with here, we're getting close to time here, Kelly. I want to make sure you cover everything that you want to cover.
Well, I would refer your listeners to some sources for additional revenue. They can go to our website,
Okay.
which is execfin, EXECFIN.com.
Mhm.
And there they'll find a whole panoply of resources that they can download and review. They can go to Amazon to order my book called The ESOP Coach.
Okay.
There are also two industry associations that serve the ESOP world, NCEO.org, the National Center for Employee Ownership.org, and the ESOP Association of America.org. And the NCEO is going to have great educational information. So our website and NCEO are probably the two best sources to get educational information.
That's great. And we're going to have all that stuff in the show notes. We will have links to all of that stuff because I think, it's really about getting educated. It's a big step to move to the ESOP, but there's a lot of advantages to it. And, especially from a tax standpoint and from a legacy standpoint, I think it is a very, very viable option for owners. So I want everybody to consider that. And if you have any questions and want to speak to me or have me make a connection for you to Kelly, just go to my website, which is highliftfinancial.com, click on the Let's Talk. We can see if it would make sense to have a conversation with Kelly and his team, and then I can always connect you if that's the case. So anyway, this is a great conversation. Like I said, I think we're starting to hear about ESOPs more and more. I actually just wrote an article for a Body Shop Business about just the basics of the ESOP, just very, very high level. I mean, I can't speak as in depth as you, but I always like to know enough to be able to guide the right client to people like you. So I'm hoping we'll see more people coming to that idea because I'm a huge proponent of legacy. I mean, we have consolidation happening in our industry at a very rapid pace, and I don't want to see every collision shop become the Walmarts and Home Depots of the world. All right. I think there's a space for the independent shop, but you got to create that culture and that business model that differentiates yourself. And I think then the ESOP can be a great way to just continue on that legacy and actually provide a benefit to your employees. So Kelly, I want to thank you for being on Your Business, Your Life. I always come out a little smarter every time I talk to you. So
well, thank you, Matt. I really enjoyed being with you again.
No problem. And the last thanks goes out to you, the audience. Thank you for listening to Your Business, Your Life. If you've not subscribed to the podcast, please click the subscribe button below. That way, when a new episode comes, it'll drop right onto your device. We're on all major platforms, iTunes, Spotify, Anchor, iHeart, you name it. And if you're watching on YouTube, where you're seeing the video too, please give us a 5-star review. That way we can get more great guests like Kelly out to more people. So again, Kelly, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. Maybe sometime we can kind of re-engage this conversation and talking a little more depth about some of the mechanics of it. But I just want to thank you so much for making me a little smarter here too.
Well, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
No problem. So thanks to everyone. Take care. God bless. And we'll see y'all real soon. Hey, I really want to thank you for listening to the Your Business, Your Life podcast. If you want to be notified when new episodes become available, click the subscribe button below.
All information is obtained from sources deemed reliable but not guaranteed. No tax or legal advice is given nor intended. Content provided herein or on our website should not be construed as an offer for investment advice or for securities, insurance, or other investment products. Investments involve the risk of loss and are not guaranteed. Consult a qualified legal, tax, accounting, or financial professional before implementing any investments or strategy discussed here. High Lift Financial is a DBA for Francesco Financial Concierge, LLC. Investment advisory services are provided through Cornerstone Planning Group, LLC, an independent advisory firm registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission.